Good morning. I sense, given a slightly dry topic in the early hour, I better begin with a sentimental story. I grew up on 12th Street and went to PS 41 and to IS 70 and to the old Stuyvesant with the pillars in the gym that made sure that we didn't have a sports team even if we could. And that sentimental story extended to starting this organization called the Grow Network here in New York, where I tricked Judy Rizzo, then Judy, now Judith, I tricked her into appearing on a video to explain to teachers the great work we were doing, and then showed it around the country and said, Judy believes in us. She's paid me back ever since, but thank you for pulling this together. But another person I met along the way was someone named Sandy Case, who I'm embarrassing because she has no idea that I'm going to talk about her this morning, who is here in the audience. And I tell you this story because remarkable teachers often notice things that most people don't notice, which is a very strange thing to describe. They see things that are otherwise unseen. And Sandy was then the head of the Chancellor's District, involved in turning around legions of poor-performing schools. And so you can imagine she had a busy day job. And this kind of little kid who's head of, she has no idea what's going to happen next. This is so fun. There's this kid from the Grow Network that, the Board of Education has sent this, they've got these new assessment reports, and, the head of the Grow Network's going to come and talk to her principals. And I had done this with throughout every district in New York, gone through them. And in this case, something quite extraordinary happened, because she got up to introduce me. And she said, now these reports are very good. They're a lot clearer. Thanks for that. But the ones in ELA, they're linked to a set of reading materials that with more care than I've seen, I've read them, she said. And they're extremely clear on what's being assessed and what's important, and they really deserve your attention. That is very weird. Who reads? Who prepares that way? And who thinks about reading like that? And who then gave a young person the confidence that while we were called an assessment company, the thinking we were then doing so many years ago about reading could be promising to a broader audience. So thank you for that, Sandy. See, now isn't it great? I can do anything wrong after that. Nice. What I want to do this morning with you is to address three related questions. The first is, since we are New Yorkers, we can now move on from sentimentality to skepticism, which is where we're much more comfortable, and say, why does this matter? Duh, New York has had good standards. You mess up the cut score on the test. Who the heck cares? I notice it's a very funny thing about people outside this process, because you can always tell inside, outside, because the outsiders say, oh, this is the easy part, as if they know, right? But as everyone says, this is merely a start. But is it a start? Is it even a significant start? That is it even material? You might say, these standards, it really matters. Is it a good teacher? Is the curriculum? So the first thing I want to discuss with you is, do the standards themselves hold promise? What's in them that amounts to a change in and of themselves? Why might they elicit your interest? But then, of course, what it might mean for this group to be involved in taking care of their potential, what that might involve. Does that make sense? So first, a guided tour of the standards themselves. Now, someone from Pencil, who I will not name, threatened me because I've expended about $10,000 yesterday asking for single-sided color copies of these documents. So if there's someone wealthy in the room who would make an approximately $10,000 contribution to Pencil this morning, that would kind of keep me alive. So if you could reimburse Pencil, that would be great. But we did it because I hate the environment, and B, I want to interest you in reading them. I want you to keep these, and I want to make them so exciting at this time of morning that you might take the time to read them yourselves. Let's begin with the Common Core State Standards in English Language Arts. That is this document. There will be an assessment following. I want to just point out to you a few things that these standards do. And if you were going to say that standards matter, you'd have to have a theory or an idea of why they might. And I think the way standards might matter, if and only if they realigned the work. That is, if we're trying to get something ambitious done in a business or any other organization, it is extremely important, it would seem obvious, that we focus a great deal of our attention on what matters most. That would seem a deduction. What I want to describe this morning is that the entire ELA infrastructure has been radically misfocused. That is, we are not concentrating on what matters in terms of kids' literacy growth in quite demonstrable and clear ways. The result of this is for 40 years, if you look at NAEP results, does anyone know what NAEP results for 40 years in 8th grade look like? 8th grade NAEP scores over 40 years? What's the curve? So flat, it's like, I mean, this is a devastating thing because the investment in education over the same period has increased enormously. There have been quite a series of reforms. There was a great reform around early reading where the hope was that that would pay off in comprehension and later reading in ways that were under-realized. So we're really stuck with this 8th grade wall and have been for quite a long time. And let's be frank, if you cannot read past an 8th grade level with confidence, career and college readiness are simply not within your reach. So we have to bring down this wall. So what role can standards play in taking down that wall? To begin to describe that, it would be a mistake, I think, to say, if we just aligned the New York State test with NAEP better, then we'd kind of fix it, right? Let's go a little deeper and think about what it would be for standards to be aligned. So if you go with me to page 5. For you math people, I'm going to begin with a table just to get some numbers in here early. And what you'll notice is that there are two tables, one on the left, one on the right, in which it describes the breakdown of texts in the NAEP test. And what it says is in 4th grade, there's a 50-50 split between informational text and literary text, changing to a 30-70 split as you move on to the demands of career and college. However, and so this is my first point about the realignment of the Common Core Standards in ELA, the first major shift. If you look at assessment and instruction in this state and virtually every other, 80% of the elementary assessment in English language arts is fiction, is literature. Why does this matter so much? Because informational text in the elementary school is not sports writing. It is science and history. It is the fundamental sources of knowledge where kids build a general knowledge of the world that is so crucial to later performance in the disciplines as well as later literacy. Everyone in reading research kind of agrees on this. E.D. Hirsch was a big leader in this kind of general knowledge kind of view, but it's been picked up by the reading research overwhelmingly. So the first thing the core standards do is it says in the elementary school environment, informational text and learning about the world through history and science and those kinds of disciplines is an equal hand to literary study in early grades. That's a major shift. It is a shift about standards, it's a shift about assessment, because it means they will be equally measured, and it's finally a shift about curriculum. It goes right through the triangle that David so well described. Number 2, so that's one thing about the standards. This continues in 6th through 12th grade, because the other thing that's kind of arguably laughable is the notion that an ELA or literary, the ELA teacher alone is responsible for the literacies that you will encounter in career and college. It is obvious to us all that the overwhelming majority of what kids encounter, both in the workplace and in college, is lots of different kinds of text, right? So these standards, for the first time, set standards for literacy, as you'll notice in the title, in history, social studies, science, and technical subjects. This is major because we've been talking about teaching across the curriculum for about 100 years, so that's just before I was born. But it doesn't have force unless it is in standards. These are standards. They are requirements for student performance. They are requirements for the adults. That is, with the enactment of these standards, we now say to the science teachers and history teachers, you are responsible for pursuing knowledge in these disciplines, but demonstrating as you do so that students can read and write, read complex texts, and write about them effectively within the disciplines. This is part of your job because it's part of what students must do. So there must be no longer any ambiguity as to whether that's someone else's work. The third point has to do with text complexity. It may not surprise you that much more than the skills with which you're reading, so there's a wonderful bit of research that takes apart kids' comprehension scores on exams. It's by ACT, it's called Between the Lines. It's a fascinating report. And what it shows is, with overwhelming amounts of information, that student scores by whether they're looking at the main idea or the vocabulary, or drawing inference, or understanding a passage, all the things we like to say are the key variables in breaking down the data of student reading, matter not near, they all correlate together. Guess what? What matters is the complexity of the text the student is reading. When students reach a text of a certain level of complexity, their ability to comprehend abandons them, hence the 8th grade wall. The problem in standards is standards have typically been a progression of skills. So you look at the New York State standards, other standards, they show the more and more advanced skills with which students are reading, but they miss the game, which is the growing complexity of the text. So for the first time, these standards set grade by grade standards for the level of text complexity that students must master, for the difficulty of what they're reading, which becomes a crucial proxy to ready them for college and career readiness.